Hey guys, Ethan here. Wanted to talk about one of the things that is, you know, I like to say it's the bane of our existence as an SA or even as a sales professional, and that is an RFP. RFP, RFQ, RFI, RF, whatever. They're all the same thing. They're essentially a request for proposals or information from companies. So, when a company releases when a company wants to do a project or implement a solution or something like that, if they're not building it in-house, they're most likely, again, depending on the dollar amount, going to be releasing an RFP, which is a request for proposal. If it's like, a couple thousand, couple tens of thousands, it probably won't be an RFP process. It'll either be in-house or, they might go to a preferred vendor of choice that they already have existing contracts with or something like that. But like if you're talking about like a 6, 7, 8-figure type of project that they're going to be implementing, you better be sure they're going to be releasing an RFP. That's just corporate policy, shareholder policy. Like you have obligation to shareholders to make sure you're finding the right solution. If it's a big company, people covering their ass, making sure that they're following that process, and there's no corruption or kickbacks or anything like that. You're making sure. So okay, what is the RFP? The RFP is an actual document usually that is released to multiple vendors. I believe that, especially government entities have an obligation to release it to a specific amount. So like there's got to be, I think, at least, depending on the type of, dollar amount, the type of project, type of organization, etc. Like, just for example, one project I remember dealing with in New York, they had an obligation to release to at least a minimum of 3 separate companies. So they request proposals from each one of those 3 companies. So it's basically a document, can be very long or less long depending. But it's basically, it says like, list of technical requirements that they have for the solution, asking questions of the vendor, the company that's implementing it, A, B, C, D, F, G, things like, do you have data encryption at rest? Do you encrypt data in transit? How do you deal with, requests from governments to release data? How do you deal with, GDPR? How do you deal with this, that, or the other? Do you have these types of features? If we're implementing, let's say, a BPM solution, a business process management solution, do you have the following capabilities to diagram things, to create models, to do all these types of things? Depending on what the solution is and what the project is, you might have different requirements. Okay, that's what an RFP is. Now, the purpose of this video really is how do you fill out an RFP? Because an RFP is not always, very straightforward or very clear cut, right? RFPs, there's an art to it. That's why I'm naming this video something to the effect of the art of RFPing, because it's an art. So what do I mean by it's an art? Let's say, for example, you've got a question. Question is, let's keep it pretty simple, yeah? Do you provide data encryption at rest for data stored in your system? That's like a run-of-the-mill type of question. So depending on your company, if you're a startup or not, depending on what your product is, you may or may not encrypt your data at rest. Always a good thing to encrypt your data at rest, but sometimes it's not feasible, right? So let's take the 2 approaches. So a yes and a no approach. So first of all, never ever respond to an RFP with a clear yes or no, like one word. That is a no-no. If the company sending out the RFP sees a response with a yes or no, it's a black mark, and it'll likely mean that you're not going to win this deal. Side point: RFPs are super critical, because as much as I personally hate RFPs, they are absolutely necessary, because that's how you win the really big deals. So if you lose an RFP, that really sucks, because those are really the big deals, the big ones. Like you're almost never gonna win a 7-8 figure deal with no RFP. So if you get an automatic cancellation on your RFP, then that really just blows. So in order for you not to get an automatic cancellation on RFP, you cannot have a one-word response. I don't care if it's even they have the check mark thing. You add another column there, and you add a response, because the more text, the more insight you give the person reading the RFP. They're like, You know, these people are interesting. They've got interesting methodologies. They explain what they're doing. Oh, they're doing it this way. Okay, that makes sense. These people know what they're doing. Or, oh, we wouldn't do it that way, but at least we have some insight into, you know, what the product's doing. Like, it's so important to add more flavor, more text, more detail to your RFP response. So back to my example. Do you provide data encryption at rest for data stored in your system? So let's say your answer was yes, right? You wouldn't want, like I said, you wouldn't want to say just yes. You would say, yes, we do encrypt our data at rest, and we do it in the following ways. If, let's say, your solution is hosted on AWS, right? We have our EBS volumes encrypted, so the actual logical volume itself is encrypted. And then the data inside of it is encrypted using vendor X. We encrypt the data, and we utilize AWS KMS to create a policy, a lifecycle policy of rotating the keys and making sure that, you know, the data is always encrypted, and our application, you know, encrypts and decrypts the data when it uses it and when it's not using it, etc. So you give a much more detailed explanation to not just, yes, you're using data encryption at rest, but how you're using data encryption at rest, right? But, you know, let's say you don't have data encryption at rest. You're a startup, you haven't gotten there yet, or maybe your application doesn't need data encryption, right? I mean, if there is no PII, or personally identifiable information, or confidential information, or anything like that, then maybe you don't really even need data encryption at rest. And, you know, it can add overhead, it could add performance, it's just unnecessary. So could be either you haven't gotten there yet because you're a startup, could be you won't get there because your application doesn't need it. Regardless, just adding a no looks really, really bad. So let's say that you had a legit reason, right? So maybe you can answer it like this, right? Do you provide data encryption at rest for data stored in your system? The answer is, while data encryption at rest is an industry best practice, and it is always good to encrypt your data at rest, we do encrypt our data in transit because we use an SSL. We use port 443 and encrypt the data in transit. We don't encrypt the data at rest because we don't have any data that's PII stored, and no confidential data isn't stored. So we don't see the need to encrypt the data at rest. Furthermore, we've done analysis, and encrypting the data at rest can add anywhere between a 5 and 250 millisecond overhead in terms of performance impact, and it's just not necessary. So, like, adding that extra level of detail to an RFP response shows the company that, okay, they don't have data at rest, but yeah, okay, that makes sense actually. Why do they need data? They don't need data at rest. That's not really a requirement. We're not giving them social security numbers. We're not giving them identifiable information. There's nothing confidential stored. It's just whatever your application doesn't need it. So yeah, that makes sense. So you see what I mean? Like, adding yes or no doesn't really do it. You have to actually, like, craft a response and make it, you know, more. It's more of an art. So just wanted to put that out there, because, you know, we as SAs fill out RFPs all the time, and I think it's important to understand that you know, answering an RFP is not like answering an SAT test or, you know, a random test. Like, it's really more like creating a piece of art. I like to think of that way. So thanks for watching, guys, and you know, see you in the next video.